Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Our delegation aligns itself with a statement of the group of friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations, and in our national capacity, we'd like to state the following. Cuba considers that it is a mistake to speak of the responsibility to protect as a principle because it is not an axiom or principle of international law. This so-called responsibility is simply a notion whose scope, rules of application, and mechanisms of evaluation are very far from having been defined and agreed by member states. With this in mind, it is inappropriate to speak of strengthening the implementation of the responsibility to protect without the existence of a consensus on its implications that resolves differences in interpretation, ensures its universal acceptance, and endows legitimacy to actions proposed for its implementation. Cuba considers that the expression crimes of atrocities continues to be used erroneously, but based on the four major crimes in Resolution 60/1. And on this, we'd like to recall that many delegations have expressed their disagreement with the use of this term, that is, mass atrocities, not only due to its legal ambiguity, but also the absence of a consensus on the definition of these, which derive from the will of member states. We'd like to express our concern about the selective use and for political purposes of these terms to refer to very diverse situations that often, in fact, are challenges that are supposedly require protection, but that could be manipulated, especially when there's a lack of consensus. Nor do we think it's a good idea to grant mandates to other organs, such as the Human Rights Council, to evaluate states on issues that are still being studied and on which there is a lack of consensus. The duty of the international community, as appropriate, is based on encouraging member states to exercise this responsibility to protect, which is first and foremost their responsibility. Mr. President, the question of the responsibility to protect continues to offer serious concerns to many countries, and in particular to small and developing nations. In an international system that is as undemocratic as the one we see today, our main concerns are based on the determination on who decides when there is a need to protect, who determines which state is not protecting its population, who determines, and based on which criteria, on the forms of taking action, and how to make sure that this topic is not used for interventionist aims. There is no clarity at all on how to guarantee that the possibility of taking action is carried out in the absence of the state affected. To avoid using this concept as a justification for the right to interfere. The international efforts in the prevention of the acts of genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, or crimes against humanity must contribute to strengthening the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and international law, and in particular, sovereign equality, territorial integrity, and self-determination. However, the ambiguities of this concept and the implications of the exercise of its so-called three pillars contradict these principles and purposes. Cuba has always shared the goal of combating these crimes, and we consider that for this we must recognize the preeminence of the principle of voluntarity, prior consent and request by states in the context of the so-called responsibility to protect. If the intention is to prevent, we must tackle the root causes of these situations, such as underdevelopment and poverty, and the unjust international economic order, inequality and social exclusion, marginalization, food insecurity, and other structural problems that determine the outbreak of conflicts due to extreme situations that unfortunately are not promoted with the same force and conviction as those who try to seek to advance this concept. Mr. President, Where is the obligation of the international community to protect the Palestinians in the face of genocide? The massacre that is taking place in Palestine is perhaps, and very painfully, the best example of the double standards that prevail in the international community. Many of the defenders of the notorious notion of responsibility to protect are the same that defend the occupying power and protect it from fulfilling its responsibilities, which ultimately only prolongs the suffering of the Palestinian people and the cycle of impunity that prevails. The example of Palestine, as so many other examples, such as Libya, have existed and exist in the world, simply corroborate that behind the intentions of the responsibility to protect is only an attempt to have another tool to facilitate the interference in internal affairs and regime change agendas and subversion in third countries, usually small and developing countries. And to make sure that the international community remains passive in the face of such crimes. The international community cannot remain passive in the face of the states. It is a responsibility to be shared by all states. Thank you.